Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Paul, and in this channel I talk over things that I'm curious about and things that I've looked into, I like to share. So in today's video, I wanted to share with you guys a diagram that me and my friends were talking about today, and how it relates to humility. And I want to go on the conversation of humility. Okay, so it's this simple diagram. It's a pretty common diagram here. This part essentially represents our walk before walking with God, and this essentially represents our life after walking with God. And what this illustration is supposed to say is like, okay, so before we even have a belief in God, God really isn't even on our radar. So that's why there is no separation here. Okay, right when we're introduced to the gospel, that's when we start to see, okay, we are a sinner. Okay, we need God. And, you know, He's good. He's the ultimate good. We're not so good. And the further along in our journey that we go, even if it's less evil sins that we're doing, we start to see, like Paul says, you know, I'm the chief of sinners, right? And so God's grace always becomes more and more magnified as we continue on with life, even if in life we are getting better in terms of, you know, not sinning as much or not sinning, you know, worse sins and whatnot. So it's just this idea here, right? That the more we're walking with God, the more we're seeing His holiness, His goodness, etc. Right? And so where I want to go with this is with the conversation of humility, because with this conversation, I was bringing this up to my friends. This is in Philippians 2, and it says this. This is talking about Jesus. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has exalted him highly and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And so one of the things that I was talking about with them was that even like with that illustration, right? It's as we continue to walk with God, we cannot do anything but become more humbled by God's goodness, by God's grace, by God's love. And I was saying that the pinnacle expression of this very thing is, show you here real quick. So we have a separation, right, with God and with us. With this, it's pretty easy because we're like, okay, we are not God. But I was like, here's something amazing about this, is that even God himself, right, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, it's like, okay, he is God. And yet even he didn't count equality with God something to be grasped, as Paul said. And so he comes in the likeness of man. So that's humbling himself, right, to the Father. He's humbling himself. He's being a servant. And then not only does he humble himself into the form of a human, then he becomes a servant of all servants, right? The life that he lives is one of a servant while here on this earth. So you have God not only becoming human and taking on the form of a human, but now within the realm of humans, he's taking on the form of a servant. And then it says, and he's now even humbling himself by becoming obedient to the point of death. So now you have God, the source of life itself and all goodness, now taking on human form, now in human form, living a servant's life, okay, a lowly life, right? And then life being obedient to take on death itself. And this is what he does in his humility. He now takes on death, but does he just take on any death? Just like he takes on human form, but does he just take on any role within humanity? No, he takes on the ultimate servant's role, right? And so just as in death, now he takes on the ultimate form of death, the criminal's death, right? And so this is that idea of extreme humility. And so as the text says in Philippians 2, God's going to raise him up, you know, higher than any name. His name is going to be exalted above every name. That way every name should confess that he is the Lord. And so I just began to think about this idea of humility, and wanted to have a little conversation with you guys on this idea of humility and think about it in relation to God. Because when I was thinking about this in relation to God, I was okay, does humility just lower itself out of confidence because of, for example, was Jesus only able to take on the form of servanthood because he knew he was God? Is that the reason why he was able to take on form of servanthood, or is there something else at play, right? Are you only able to serve because he knows, just like he was saying on the cross, hey, at any moment I could have the angels, come around, or, he was saying that before. And so it's like, okay, does humility happen because the person has supreme confidence in their abilities and who they are? Like, is the guy going to let, the child beat him up because he knows that if he really wanted to, he could beat, the child up if there would be an actual fight? Like, is that the actual thing going on? Because there's power and security. Now I can be humble, right? And I wouldn't say that's the answer. And here's why. Because of what it says in verse 6. It says, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. And so this goes to that thing like, no, Jesus genuinely, he's like, okay, I don't count equality with the Father, right? With the complexity of that, which I think this is why Paul says something to be grasped. It's like the mystery here. And this is what I want to talk about with humility. Humility and displaying humility, we oftentimes receive the blunt end of things, right? Even with God, with his people Israel in the Old Testament, he was the husband. If you think of the covenant that he had with Israel, he was the husband who was constantly getting cheated on with Israel going after lesser men, if you will, called gods, right? These idols that he would always get frustrated over, right? Because Israel just kept running from them. And if you think about God in relation to the idols, it's like, okay, well, there's no comparison. So why on earth did Israel keep running? Yet his love drove him to set up an everlasting covenant, one that would be better than the first covenant, which is why we have the New Testament with Jesus and with his blood on the cross instead of continually offering the goats and the lambs and the bulls, etc. Okay, so God's innate humility and love, although he continually got cheated on and got spat on and all this stuff, drove him to love us deeper. And so humility, it's one of those things that's not, we praise it in others, but if we were to practice it ourselves, it has a strange taste in our mouths, right? Especially when we think of, man, we don't deserve to be treated a certain way. We don't deserve to be disrespected. We don't deserve to be, and list whatever thing that you want to list. And this is when, again, I just really started a process. Does humility even think about that? Or does humility go, no, I desire to serve you more. You are rejecting me. You are spitting on me. You are slandering me. You're saying all these things. You're doing all these things. You're being horrible. Does humility feel like it deserves a better relationship? Like it deserves someone else or something else? So this is just one of those things that I wanted to think about and I wanted to ponder with you, because if you desire to be humble, you're asking, I think, for something far more serious than what we think about with just humility. You're saying you want to view yourself in a completely different light. If you're thinking of humility in terms of how you're going to act in relation to others, I would say yes, that is a part of humility. But I would also say the other part of humility is a complete identity change. Who, though you may be one thing, though you may be a CEO, though you may be the father, though you may be, the mother, though you may be the president, though you may be whoever you may be, king, queen, whatever, your identity is fundamentally shifted to go, no, I'm your servant. I'm your servant. And even when, you talk trash, even though I'm ranked so high above you, how do I respond to this? And I'm getting this just because I'm thinking about Jesus and stuff. It's like, okay, he was enthroned with God, right? He comes down, takes on the form of servant, becomes the servant of servants, becomes obedient to death. And then not only just death, but death on a cross, the criminal's death, right? The worst way to die. What should our response be to the people who are in our life? And sure, we may have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 or 10 ranks above them in societal terms. But at the end of the day, our form is still a human. Like we are still the same as each other. We are human. So if God was able to demonstrate true humility, what that means way, way, way further than all of us, the next time we get wronged, or the next time someone's just doing something to us. And let's say we have every right and every power to do something. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't always do it, just because we're humble. So just take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But what I am saying is, yes, God did, punish at different times. God did do all these different things at different times, but his heart ultimately was to set up a new covenant, was to set up an everlasting covenant with his people, for his people, that, as the text says, every name under heaven and earth and under the earth should confess his name, right? And proclaim that he is Lord. And so for us, with our brothers and sisters around the world, right? And maybe even within our own household, taking on, saying that you desire to be humble, that's a complete identity shift. It's not just serving when it's convenient. It's completely, it's like 10 times deeper than that. And when we think about, and I think this just came in my head just now, but I think when we think about, it's like, okay, that Paul's argument might have been in Romans. I can't cite it right now. It's not coming to my mind, but it's the idea of, okay, will someone die for a good person? Occasionally, rarely, but occasionally. But what about dying for a bad person, as we say, right? It's like, who does that, right? And that's exactly what, Jesus did for us. Died for those who were the ones who crucified him and put him up. And so when we're asking for humility, or we desire humility, just know you are asking for a complete identity shift and to become a servant of servants, and to possibly be obedient to the point of extreme pain or death. And that's something to consider. And some people may say, with that statement that I just said, that's a little extreme. And I would say the one who we worship demonstrated exactly what he meant by that, and showed us exactly how far he was willing to go. And yet we take hope in that. We praise that. And it's like the saints that we admire, have they not done the exact same thing in walking in the Lord's ways? So next time you're saying that you want love, patience, humility, kindness, joyful, whatever these things are, just know some of them, it's not just a good characteristic to have. You might just be asking for complete life change if you were to get the thing in its fullness. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your feedback on this. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next one.